Don't be afraid. I just want to help you.
It was a Friday evening after middle school at the Hollywood 20 on Main Street in Sarasota, Florida, where I first saw Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away. But by some measure of grace, this wasn't my first encounter with his work. It was only a year before when my sister came home with a VHS copy of Princess Mononoke, and it was through promotional material attached to that tape I realized I had already seen his films. Castle in the Sky, My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service. So as you can probably imagine, shuffling into the front section of the theater to view Spirited Away, regularly regarded as one of the greatest animated films ever made, is maybe the most impactful of my early film memories, and an emotionally resonant childhood experience that I've recently revisited during some extremely late nights. I watched it recently, then I watched it again and again, and the most remarkable part of this is how my gaze has only widened as time passes. A childhood staple I revisit every year or so somehow gains new meaning as life goes on. I remember at the time a strong feeling of camaraderie with the film's main character Chihiro, a 10-year-old girl who we're introduced to while she's moving house with her parents, visibly upset and a bit bratty about it. I mean, who wasn't when they were upset as a child? I get it. And completely unprepared for what comes next for her. After stumbling upon an abandoned amusement park, Chihiro's family wanders into a fully stocked restaurant, and while her parents engorge on food that's not theirs, she takes off on her own, visibly uncomfortable with the prospect of doing something wrong like taking food that doesn't belong to her, and stumbles into a bathhouse and a boy around her age who gives her a very strict warning.
You shouldn't be here. Get out of here, now!
What?
It's almost night. Leave before it gets dark. They're lighting the lamps. Get out of here! You've got to get across the river. Go! I'll distract them.
As she attempts to flee back to her family, she finds her parents have become pigs, and the once dry grassland they walked over has become an ocean of water. Chihiro is trapped, alone, employed at this bathhouse patroned by the folkloric kami of Shintoism, far from home and her family, and not sure how to make things right again. We watch this young girl struggle against forces outside of her control, against a cruel, profiteering witch extracting whatever labor she can from everyone around her. Even with the kindness and generosity of strangers trying to help her make the best of a horrible situation, we watch Chihiro in a physical pain at the loss of her family, so emotionally hurt, so unsure of herself at such a young age. We watch her cry while she eats. It's a scene I can barely get through now. But thanks to these strangers turned friends, as well as her own wits and determination, things ultimately are made right again. She's reunited with her family as if awoken from a horrible dream, and she goes off to her new home, forever changed, yet still the same young girl we met 2 hours earlier. Miyazaki described this film in an interview from 2001 as a sort of attempt to fill a gap in his own filmography, to speak directly to the feelings and experiences of 10-year-old girls after summers spent with the children of his friends. We have made Totoro, which was for small children, and Kiki's Delivery Service, in which a teenager has to live with herself. We have not made a film for 10-year-old girls who are in the first stage of their adolescence. I felt this country only offered such things as crushes and romance to 10-year-old girls, though in looking at my young friends, I felt this was not what they held dear in their hearts, not what they wanted, and so I wondered if I could make a movie in which they could be heroines. It's one thing to so effectively portray the struggles of childhood in thoughtful, empathetic, artistic ways, but it's an entirely different elevation to so carefully consider the distance life's circumstances seem to place between us from the perspective of a young girl struggling to adapt to the absence of the familiar, the introduction of unimaginable conflict, and the necessity of children to undergo growth in sudden, unexpected ways they didn't ask for and ways they don't deserve. It's so remarkable that this isn't limited to Spirited Away, but present thematically in so many of these films as a recognition of the role melancholy plays in not just the lives of adults, but children as well. Two young girls move to rural Japan with their father to be close to their sick mother and befriend the keeper of the forest and other kami resembling cats. In their grief and concern, the younger sister runs to her mother's side and sends the entire village and her family on a mad rush to find her. A teenage witch finds her place in an unfamiliar setting as part of her training, losing her powers and ability to communicate with her best friend through familiar adolescent doubt, only to have those powers realized again, ending the film by riding home happy. It's a literary form familiar to Studio Ghibli, and perhaps the central element that codifies these filmmakers as titans of media that examines the lives of children. There is magic in the willingness to link the interpretive framework of young people to the already existing language of our social and cultural worlds in such a way that affirms their feelings and challenges the perspectives of adults. These stories accept the ways children are already being challenged, and it addresses this by emphasizing the role of care in a cruel and unpredictable world, how often this care comes from unexpected places, and the chief lesson of our shared sense of sadness, should we be willing to recognize it in others. Melancholia is the central theme of Spirited Away, but not just melancholy as a reservoir for resentments and anxieties about contemporaneity, but as an essential element of living that begs for its own overcoming. As Chihiro lives in this other world away from her family, she begins to forget her own life. Her parents are unrecognizable to her. She is given a new name, and all that is familiar to her begins to drift away, and what remains is a persistent sadness that can only be overcome by remembering and holding on to that which made her Chihiro. Where the perspective of a child becomes incredibly powerful is in the necessity to overcome this for lack of any other choice. Children don't have the same choices that we do. Children cannot accept defeat in the same way that we do. Retreat into fantasy, yes, but a lack of resentment and a reliance on the feeling of life as it's truly lived. Remarkable. Even the most compassionate and loving of adults constantly fail to appropriately intellectually engage with children. We fail to push against these strange instincts we have to refuse to define, refuse to answer, or address their remarkable observant capabilities, choosing our own comfort while neglecting the chthonic force of children's thought. We use the complacency of contemporary life to directly interfere with the production of childhood memories, and use our own deeply felt desires to be better or different to ironically quiet this criticism, a kind of stifling of our own imagination for lack of effort, a coping mechanism to deal with impending failure, the gray horizon hanging in the most seemingly enclosed and intimate spaces. We explain away loss and change by inviting passivity into our hearts and engendering this as a value in our children. Things just happen. I cannot change. Things cannot change. This melancholia, the constant presence of absence, manifest as a form of persistent sorrow, is in some sense inherent to the way we experience the world, how we remember, and the inevitable process of interpretation that immeasurably impacts what it means to be a person. And the sense of melancholy that is driving this fundamental absence is made plain as day by the necessary loss of imagination in the transition from childhood to adulthood, and how our attempts to capture this by engendering something in our children is always erased from behind, colored by this nagging sense that we've already missed what was important, that the good times are already behind us. I'm afraid I'm already forgetting the magical feeling of meeting my child for the first time, a child who arrived earlier than expected. The feeling of her tiny hand in mine while she rested under machines helping her breathe, the feeling of the entire world resting next to me, the incredibly lucid and vivid dreams I had sleeping in the hospital while she gained enough weight to come home with us, the conversations with our family while she quietly slept in my arms, completely unassuming, totally brand new, a powerful symbol of our shared potential and the increased capacity for love that grows from within me. I grow bigger and bigger every day. I'm not certain how best to meet this challenge because I too am fearful of the slippage of the present, a lack of certainty or confidence in my action or position, in my determinative choices that have the potential to make some mark on the world despite my small stature and the one short life I have to live. My only guess comes from this idea that we must awaken from the shared dream of our contemporary state, an awakening into consciousness after the passage from various historical dream states, a threshold between these transitions in life, as a way to connect to our children, and in some way make ourselves whole again after so much has fallen away. Love conditioned on a recognition of our own insufficiencies, the need for those we care for to experience the strain and difficulties of life, and the capacity for care we can find within ourselves during these lucid moments of living. When you work overnights and spend hours away due to the necessity of providing for those who rely on you, when you're sick and have to be in a hospital far away, and it's the only choice you have of actually maybe getting better and being there for your loved ones eventually. The knowledge of your little girl shedding tears alone without her parents because you can't always be there. It's so painful and ordinary, summed up by one of my favorite contemporary poets when he said, "Distance has a way of making love understandable." Perhaps these feelings are their own small awakenings within a dream we might share. It's a realization of our shared sadness at the fragility of our own lives and the importance of being there for each other, even when we're not close. I'll never forget the first dream I had after she was born. I was running through the Alabama hospital where she was born with my husband, our daughter gripped tightly in my arms, downstairs and through unfamiliar hallways, past the intensive care unit where I first saw her, where we were treated so kindly and lovingly, just like any other parents. We were running, but I remember distinctly that we weren't running from anybody. No fear of enemies, perceived or real, no struggle, no pain, just running. A strange, inspiring jog through the maternity wing, filled with joy, wonderfully free, as awake as I'll ever be. I can't do that again, man. That's gotta be it.